What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a review of Cyberpunk 2077 after 100%ing the game. Right off the bat, this video, while I'm going to do my best to avoid spoilers, realistically, there's probably going to be some at least contextual spoilers, even outside of the portion that I'm going to mention a spoiler skip for. If you really don't want spoilers for this game, maybe you should hold off watching this. With that in mind, jumping into some other stuff. One, I am playing this on PC with a 9900K and a 2080 Ti. By the way, that seems perfectly adequate to me. Graphically, didn't really have a lot of problems. Computer didn't have any trouble running it. I am obviously aware that the last-gen performance is awful, so sorry about that. If you happen to have bought the game on last-gen consoles, seems like a bad time, I'd be mad too. With that in mind, on PC, seems to run perfectly fine. Don't really have any complaints. There are bugs and stuff. I'll get into that at the appropriate section. But just to get it out of the way, we are going to do the story first. I'm going to summarize the story right now. I'm going to put a link in the description below where you can skip ahead. And just to give one last heads up, I like to do reviews after 100% because they differentiate what my channel does compared to what every other channel does. And that all of these much larger channels obviously have all these audiences and stuff, and so I like to do something unique as opposed to doing just the same review everyone else has done. So I like to 100% games and then review them. The link to my Steam profile is actually on my YouTube channel if you want to go check it out. I do this a decent amount. Jumping into the story. Again, this is the spoilery part for sure, so maybe skip ahead with the timestamp in the description. The story, for just broad strokes, is kind of short. It's linear, only has substantial choices at the end of it, to be honest. So you play as V. You can pick a life path, but regardless, you are V. You become a mercenary. You get roped into robbing a very rich person of some unique biochip called a relic. Eventually, you steal that chip, but the heist goes bad, and your friend dies, and you are stuck with the biochip, at which point you are eventually killed with the biochip inside of you. At this point, the biochip, seeing your body as an empty vessel, takes it over and tries to imprint the engram on the biochip, which turns out to be Johnny Silverhand, played by Keanu Reeves, onto your brain. Essentially, the chip saved you, but you're still going to die. The chip, seeing that you died, revived you essentially in an attempt to download Johnny Silverhand onto your brain. The problem is this is an experimental chip. It's very new tech even for this world of Cyberpunk. So it brought you back to life at the same time. So now you have to deal with slowly dying while someone else takes over your mind and body. So the story, of course, revolves around you trying to figure that out. You follow up leads. So first you start with a woman named Evelyn Parker, who was the one who contracted the job to begin with. You track her down after the heist goes bad, trying to see if she knew what this was all about ahead of time. And that leads you to the Voodoo Boys, which eventually leads you to a woman named Alt Cunningham, who used to be a person and has since turned into a rogue AI outside the Black Wall. And we'll put a pin in that and come back to it. The other lead is one Anders Hellman, a defector, so to speak, from the company that made the biochip. In fact, he's the one who designed it. So you can track him down through a series of side quests and interrogate him, obviously a bit against his will, and he can basically explain the specifics of the biochip, but essentially he can't help you with where you are now. He simply doesn't have access to the technology to help you. But you pass him off into the hands of one Takimura. So this guy is actually the bodyguard of a rich guy who died at the beginning of the game called Saburo Arasaka. So you steal the biochip from a young man named Yorinobu Arasaka. Of course, these people being the heirs to the Arasaka company who built the biochip. Yorinobu murders his father Sobaru at the beginning of the game, during the heist, basically. You watch this happen. Takimura is the bodyguard of Saburo, who obviously isn't happy with Yorinobu killing his charge. When you are discovered after the heist goes bad, Takimura is the one who actually pulls you out of the proverbial wreckage and gets you to a doctor to not die, regardless of whether or not you had the biochip in your brain to begin with. Now, you can help Takimura try to get revenge on Yorinobu and essentially help yourself out at the same time. So you pass Anders Hellman back to Takimura. Our third lead is helping Takimura. You can set up essentially an elaborate plot to speak with a member of the Arasaka family and explain that Yorinobu killed his father in an attempt to take over the company. And if you do this, in theory, the company and Takemura and his associates might be able to help you with the technology they created, that is the biochip in your head. So eventually, this revolves around talking to Hanako, I believe her name is, which is the third member of the Arasaka family, that is Yorinobu's sister, and of course, Suburo's daughter. So eventually you do this. Takemura winds up accidentally abducting her because he doesn't have time, and essentially you explain to Hanako that, Yorinobu murdered his father, and she's like, yeah, everybody knows that already. It's just a matter of proving it and getting people to believe it. Now that meeting goes sideways and leads to almost the only impactful decision in the game, which is whether or not to save Takemura. So the building you're in gets attacked after you abduct Hanako by the Arasaka company, and you can just leave Takemura there. And if you don't go back upstairs after the building gets blown up to save him, then he just dies, which means you've just locked yourself out of an achievement. Because, unprompted by quest objectives or anything, you can actually go back upstairs, save Takemura, and then that opens up a little extra at the end. Which is, I mention it only because that's almost the only impactful decision to be made during the story, which is nonsense to me. Beyond that, it's a very linear experience. A well-told linear experience. The narrative is really good. Regardless, very linear. Once you have all of those things done, or at least some of them, at some point Johnny Silverhand is going to mention to you that you need to figure out a way to get to what they call Mikoshi. Mikoshi is essentially where all of the people's brains that they are collecting, or at least the imprints of their brains, are stored on a technological device. Think of it like a storage building, but for people turned into AI, if you will. So you need to get in there and somehow separate yourself from Johnny Silverhand before you die. That is to say, before Johnny Silverhand takes you over completely. Now, once you have all of those things done, you're eventually going to get to a point in the story where, it's time to decide, period. You've got to do something here. And the story will actually tell you, of course, that you've reached a point of no return. And essentially, obviously, if you're going to play open world, that's pretty much where it stops. From there, that's where all of the endings happen. So the point of no return is when you are called to speak to Hanako after the abduction, the subsequent attack and everything. Once all of the other leads for the main story are sorted out, she'll call you, tell you to come talk to her, basically, and give you some options. And then after that happens, you will have a big flare-up of the relic, which is to say Johnny Silverhand taking you over, and it's clear that you don't have much time anymore. So you have to get this sorted out. Now, the endings from here are, and I do literally mean from here, you kind of have to choose right here, hence the point of no return, are essentially let Johnny Silverhand take over your body to assault the Arasaka Tower for a second time, getting you access to Mikoshi with the help of Alt Cunningham that I mentioned earlier, the rogue AI. She's going to pierce Arasaka's defense networks and use that information to separate you and Johnny Silverhand for you guys. You can storm the company yourself with the help of the nomads, which you also meet during the main story as part of the plot to interrogate Anders Hellman. You can, of course, side with Hanako to help her take down her brother, which is essentially siding with the bad guys. Or you can choose none of those options and just blow your brains out, which does not give you an ending at all, by the way. With the other three endings I mentioned, there is a bit of nuance. So with the Johnny Silverhand option and the Nomad option, you're going to get to a point where you reach Mikoshi, and you can have a cyberspace conversation with Johnny Silverhand after the length of the game, and essentially decide whether you're going to keep your body or if Johnny Silverhand is going to keep your body. Because regardless of what you do during the game, the damage to your body has been done. If you give your body to Johnny Silverhand, the biochip has been slowly rewriting your body to accept his mind anyway, so he'll survive. However, if you go back to your body, the damage has been done to it. You have about 6 months to live by Alt Cunningham's projections. So the ending here is essentially decide whether or not you keep your body or does Johnny Silverhand. Now, depending on if you went with Johnny Silverhand or the Nomads, you get a slightly different ending if you choose to keep your body. If you choose to keep your body and you chose the Nomad path, then you'll leave Night City. If you choose to keep your body and you went with Johnny Silverhand, you become a mercenary legend of the afterlife, which is like the big mercenary culture. However, if you choose to let Johnny Silverhand take your body, he gets a separate ending after all that happens. And then if you sided with Arasaka and you kept Takemura alive, you get a little extra on that ending as well, but I would say that's the bad ending. If you choose that ending, you don't get the choice of who keeps your body, you do, because that was the whole point of siding with them, is that they could help you get rid of Johnny Silverhand. So that's kind of the story quickly summarized for you guys. Again, very linear experience. Was not wild about how linear it was. All of the choices happen at the end. It's possible to miss like 1 or 2 bits of it, but not much. I'm okay with it being relatively short compared to The Witcher 3's absolute marathon of a game, which I mention only because it's made by the same company and they addressed how long that was with this game. That was intentional to make it shorter. I just don't like how super linear it was. This is V's story, and that's just going to be what it's going to be. But okay, let's jump on to the next bits. So, assuming I have people from the spoiler skip starting here, I just want to mention that I'm going to talk about problems, bugs, things like that towards the end of the video. Most of this video is going to be kind of like statements of facts and essentially what the game is, and then towards the end of the video I'll discuss the things I liked, didn't like, problems I think the game has, things like that. With that in mind, talking about character progression. So you choose a life path, of course. You can choose Corpo, Street Kid, or Nomad. Street Kid seems to be the option they expected everyone to take. I have played the others, they're pretty fun, but all these life paths really are a short introduction to the story. All they are conversation options in the game, which can help certain conversations or hinder them. Here's the thing though, they don't do this very well. I know they don't do this very well because I play CRPGs where this is a whole thing. Essentially all this does is give you one extra conversation option sometimes. CRPGs do this so much better, it's ridiculous. This is not a well-implemented system. It does give you a little flavor, comparatively. Games of a different genre, I'll give you that at least, have done this so much better, it's comical to me actually, how poorly this was done in this huge release of a game. You pick a life path, it's essentially just a conversation option, given your background. Then you enter the character creator. The character creator, it's okay. I don't really care too much. There's not a ton of options, at least as much as I thought there would be going into it, but it's not bad. So choose your character, how you want them to look, including all the not safe for work options. And then after that, you're going to be brought up to stats. So there are essentially 5 stats: intelligence, body, reflex, cool, and technical ability. Now at character creation, you can take some of these up to 6. However, they ultimately go up to 20 at a max. And every level, you get 1 attribute point and 1 perk point, because each of these attributes is connected to a set of skills. Like technical ability is engineering and crafting. Reflexes is handguns, assault rifles, and bladed weapons. So each of these attributes is tied to a set of skills. That skill can only be as high a level as the attribute it is associated with. So if you only have, say, 5 body, you will never be able to get athletics or annihilation up above 5. The individual skills also have a level cap of 20. But that said, just because you have the attribute capped out doesn't necessarily mean you're good at something. So if you have an attribute capped out and you say are wanting to play a melee blades character, just because you have the attribute associated with handguns doesn't mean you're good at it. You would still have to then level up handguns. It just raises the max level cap of that associated skill. And that lends naturally to the builds and combat section of this review. In a couple words, surprisingly diverse. Honestly, the combat is one of the best parts of this game. It's really solid. There's a ton of diversity to the builds, melee characters, stealth characters, various types of weapon characters, smart weapons, cyberware that you can put on your character, which I'll get into here in just a minute. Like in terms of build diversity, spot on. It is both simple and pretty deep all at once. It's solid. Can't really give it too many faults. The only genuine complaint I have about combat is that the actual gunplay kind of sucks. Like, it's not great. It feels a lot like Fallout 4 to me, which is weird. There are perks and abilities and stuff that do make that start to feel better. And moreover, this is an RPG, so I wasn't really expecting it to feel amazing to begin with, but it also just doesn't feel good. So wanted to mention that. So I mentioned Cyberware. This being, of course, Cyberpunk 2077, and one of the main points of the game being that you can implant your body with insane amounts of cyberware. This is a cool system because it is separate from your build. However, some of the cyberware does have attribute requirements as well as street cred requirements. Street cred is just a reputation, essentially, that you get from doing various side content in the game, as well as the main content. Basically, any content you do is going to give you more street cred. It's essentially just a pseudo-progression system. Cyberware is often locked behind street cred and an attribute requirement. For instance, most of the circulatory stuff requires a certain amount of the body attribute. That said, though, most of this stuff is insanely useful regardless. There's a lot of choice here. Some of them are clear winners. For instance, it's difficult to get your hands on, but if you have 16 body, the second heart circulatory implant is one of the best. It just flat out gives you a second health bar every 2 minutes. It's insane. But it's also expensive and hard to get, and you have to have one level shy of the max street cred in the game to use it. So it's a late game option. But there's all sorts of stuff with cyberware that really changes the flow of combat as well as your build. You can get a double jump, actually. You can get various things that can slow down time for you, for instance. You can, of course, equip the mantis blades. Big favorite of that one, by the way. Amazing. Really loved the mantis blades. It shocked me how fun that was. But suffice to say, build in combat, really fun. Didn't really have any complaints with that. It was a good time. So from here I want to talk about the world of Cyberpunk and essentially Night City. So the world building is probably the best part of this game. Night City is awesome. The surrounding wastelands called the Badlands are also awesome. This feels like a city. It has the appropriate resources. You can go outside of town and see the big solar fields they use for all the energy for the city. You can go find where they grow their food. It's awesome. It seems an appropriate amount. It's pretty neat. It is not, of course, without its downsides as well, however. While the city is amazing and fun to explore, and I will say the districts feel very unique, they are not what they were promised. So it was mentioned that the districts would react differently to you because, like, the nicer, fancier districts don't want all this running and gunning going on. That's just flat out not true. You can do that all day in those districts for the side content, and it doesn't matter, just like it doesn't matter in every other district. The only real difference I noticed in the more expensive districts is that if you have your weapon drawn when you pass by a cop, the cop will then aggro and deal with you. No one else will. No one else cares. The districts reacting differently to your character is just false across the board. That just doesn't happen. Unfortunately, as cool as this world is, I would say probably about 80% of the side content is just terrible. Almost all of it revolves around go here, kill this person, go here, rescue this person, go here, steal this thing, go here, plant this thing. That is the majority of the side content. Now, honestly, if the combat wasn't so fun, it would completely ruin it. I don't mind that most of this content is just not that great, simply because the combat while you do those things is so fun. My favorite thing about the side content, though, are these mini-boss battles with what they call cyber psychos. Now, essentially, implanting your body with all this tech can drive some people literally insane. Their mind snaps and they can't handle it. And they go insane and they go on murder sprees. These people are called cyber psychos. There are 17 of them in the game that you will find through various side activities, some of them literally being labeled cyber psycho sightings, some of them hidden behind different side missions. These guys are essentially just mini-bosses. However, what I like about them is that essentially what they did was they handed an NPC a player build, and you have to fight the guy with it. So it's really cool. It kind of displays some of the things you can do with the build, even if you yourself didn't go that route, and I thought it was really fun to engage with. When I'm talking about side content, it's important to differentiate between gigs, NCPD side hustles, and actual side missions. So side gigs are essentially where you're doing a short job for a fixer. NCPD hustles are where you're essentially doing work for Night City Police, which seems counterproductive. Essentially, it's just go here, kill all of these criminals. And then you have the actual side missions, which are named. Most of the side gigs are like literally called side gig and then, name. Whereas the NCPD hustles usually don't show up on your quest log at all. They're just like literally go here, kill these people in this area type stuff. And then there's the side missions. These are the named missions. The problem is there's no way to find the side missions without going through all of the terrible content. The side missions themselves have a lot more thought put into them, and they are usually better fleshed out. More often than not, they're also not that great, though. Not a big fan of them, but I just want to point out that there is a difference between those things. Some of the side missions are pretty memorable. For instance, I talked down a suicidal AI car. I got into fistfights with all these people who had all this cyberware going on. That was fun. I had to help a man with his malfunctioning, let's say, not safe for work cyberware and get him to a doctor ASAP. So some of them are memorable, some of them are fun. It's just the problem is that most of it isn't. Most of it's really bad. So you might be asking yourself, how does that work out? How are these bad? Well, I think I might know why. So there are, I won't call them companions because it's not exactly accurate, but there's 5 people who are associated with the main story but are like slightly adjacent to it at the same time. And these are the people that you can romance more like thoroughly, like get into an actual relationship with if you choose to do so. These quests are much more fleshed out. Like every one of these is pretty memorable. A couple of them are short, like 3 of the 5 are really short, and then 2, which I assume are the people they thought people would engage with the most, are much longer. The first 3 are only a couple missions, and then the last 2 are like 6 or 7 missions. Like it's drastically longer. Nonetheless, all of these people are really cool. You can kind of engage with them and like define that relationship, so to speak, with, are you romancing them? Are you guys just friends? Are you helping this person? Are you mean to this person? It's pretty cool. A lot of the content there was some quality stuff that I enjoyed quite a bit. Lastly, before I start getting into the problems and the bugs and stuff at the end of this video, the last thing I want to talk about before that is choices. There just aren't a lot of them in terms of story decisions. Yes, you can make a lot of choices about who you romance, you can make a lot of choices about how you build your character, but nonetheless, you are V, this is V's story, and V's story is going to play out the way it's going to play out, and the only choice you really have is in the ending. There are almost no impactful decisions to be made. There are a few. However, even those are usually hidden to some degree because you just have to intuitively go do them. As I mentioned earlier with Takamura, there is no objective to go save Takamura. It doesn't tell you he can be saved. In fact, it actively tells you to leave him to die. You have to, on your own, go back up into a building that is on fire and, falling apart just to see if this dude's alive. Nothing will lead you to that, and I'm fine with that. My only problem with that is that it's like the one of a few times it ever happens, but that is how most of the choices happened, where you just have to intuitively do things, as well as the choices being in how you approach a mission. So the mission, ultimately though, is going to conclude the same way. It's just how you approach that mission. That's about all the choice you get. Sometimes with more substantial choices, you might get a follow-up side mission, but then that doesn't really affect anything besides maybe your narrative of what happened in your head. But in your the conclusion of the quests and things, it just doesn't change anything. The only choices that have a significant impact on things are at the very end of the game, and that just doesn't feel good to me, especially for a game that was touted as this big RPG. In summary, there's just not a lot of impactful choices. So let's talk problems, pros, bugs, all that stuff, and then I'm going to tell you guys how I feel about the game in grand fashion, shall we say, the entire game overall. First, let's dive into bugs and problems. So personally, again, playing this on PC, from the sounds of it, the last gen performance is just broken. I don't know personally, I don't really play on consoles. I've seen some of the videos, I've read all the complaints. Some people seem to be okay with it, but the vast majority just think it's really bad, and it looks really bad. Now, on PC, most of what I encountered was UI bugs, and they are often and annoying. However, it's fine. You get over it. I don't really care that much personally. Probably the biggest one that would happen is sometimes like item descriptions and stuff would just get like stuck on my screen, and that was easily fixed. You just had to go like pick up other items and it would eventually clear out. Oftentimes my health bar and things would just not display during combat like it's supposed to. Just lots of stuff like that. For me, it was just tons of these stupid little UI bugs. It was really annoying. Probably like the weirdest bug, and at least I assume it's a bug, is like sometimes when you call your car, it just like keeps going. So when you call your car, like in an automated like driving system or whatever is supposed to bring it to you, which fair enough, whatever. But sometimes it doesn't stop where you are and it just keeps driving. And it's like, what? Come on, man. So you wind up like having to chase down your own car, and it's just a ridiculous fiasco because you're just trying to go somewhere. Now that said, there are occasionally large bugs. I have fell through the map. I have glitched out of cars. I have had quests just refuse to progress to the next objective, which I had to reload saves for. None of this stuff was game breaking. It was just really annoying, I guess is my point, at least for me on PC. Pros and cons. Let's talk about problems. Your apartment is pointless. It gives you an apartment in the game. You don't ever need to go there for anything ever at all. So in theory, that's where your stash is supposed to be, which is like fine, I guess, but you can access your stash from your car. You can sell things out in the world. Like, you never need to go to your apartment outside when the story tells you to go to your apartment. I don't know. It just seems pointless. I feel like they could have done more with that. It's like, I'm supposed to live here or whatever, but there's literally zero reason for me to go there ever. As I mentioned, choices do not matter outside of mission progression. That is to say, how you approach a mission. The side content is like 80% terrible. Some of it's really good. The overwhelming majority of it is really bad. On the pro side of things, the open world is awesome to explore. The Cyber Psycho mini-bosses are really cool, and the combat and the build diversity is really solid. I had a lot of fun playing the game as a build, adhering to that build, becoming that type of character, so to speak, and then as a result, the combat is really fun. There's just tons of ways to engage with it and the environment with your combat abilities. Probably one of the strongest points of the game, on top of the actual city itself being really cool. And then, of course, in the problem section, because I forgot to mention it, the districts, while distinct visually, don't live up to what they said they were going to be, which is to say that they don't react to you differently at all. In conclusion, how do I feel about this game after the 85 hours it took me to 100% it? I would say, like, I don't know, it's not bad. Like, I had a good time. Obviously, like, I 100% of the game. It's just, it's not what it was hyped up to be. Some of the things the developers said it was supposed to be are just blatantly false. But at the same time, I did have quite a bit of fun. The story is really cool. The way they did the first-person narrative stuff, immersion-wise, is honestly, like, great. I hope more games do that in the future. I thought that was really cool. But if I was going to recommend this game to someone, unless you're just like super into sci-fi and like build diversity, I guess, honestly, you should probably just wait until all the DLC releases, because then you're going to buy a polished game at its best value with the most content. So if I was going to recommend Cyberpunk to someone right now, I would tell you to just wait until the DLC comes out and buy it as a bundle. Because right now, unless you are just really into this genre, it's probably just not worth the money until they get some of this stuff sorted out. On top of the things they need to sort out, it's just an okay game, which in some ways is worse than it being bad. Because bad you can have a strong reaction to, but after 100%ing this game, the best I can tell you is meh, the combat's pretty good and the world is cool. That's disappointing after 8 years in development. It just is. With that in mind, guys, if you watched this entire thing, thank you. It was pretty long. I do a lot of this kind of stuff. I do reviews after I 100% games. Honestly, though, most of my channel is about CRPGs. I play a ton of those. But regardless, I hope you like, comment, stick around, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.